August 28, 2003 was just another ordinary day on the Underground, right up to the moment that it wasn't. During the evening peak at 6:20, all the power just went out. A massive failure on the national grid. Trains lost their traction power, lifts and escalators stopped, but the lights stayed on. So what happened? Well, the National Grid released an investigation report on the matter, so I'll read from that. Quote, "The sequence of events started at 1811. Engineers at the Electricity National Control Center, or National Control, received an alarm indicating that a transformer or its associated shunt reactor at Hurst substation was in distress and could fail, potentially with a significant safety and environmental impact. This Buchholz alarm told National Control that gas had accumulated within the oil inside the equipment, which could lead to a major failure. National Grid has approximately 1,000 transformers with associated equipment connected to its transmission system, and only on average 13 Buchholz alarms are received each year." End quote. A BBC article about the blackout revealed this transformer had been leaking oil for at least 3 weeks prior to the incident. However, it was topped up with oil after the fault was reported. After the Buchholz alarm was detected, the transformer was deactivated and disconnected from the grid. This was nothing unusual and should only take a few minutes for all the necessary power rerouting to take place. On occasion, it took 10 minutes, but this process triggered the second fault. Back to the report. Unexpectedly, a few seconds after the switching, the automatic protection equipment on the number 2 circuit from Wimbledon to New Cross operated, interpreting the change of power flows due to the switching as a fault. The report then goes on to say, the automatic protection relay disconnected the circuit from Wimbledon to New Cross. This disconnected New Cross, Hurst, and part of Wimbledon from the rest of the transmission system, causing the loss of supply. 724 megawatts of supplies were lost, amounting to around 20% of total London supplies at that time. This affected around 410,000 of EDF Energy customers, with supplies being lost to parts of London Underground and Network Rail. The report revealed that the reason this circuit was disconnected was an incorrect relay was installed, just like if you used the wrong fuse in your electrical plug. If you use a 3 amp fuse instead of a 13 amp fuse, when you plug in your iron, the fuse will blow, even though there wasn't any electrical danger present. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't have been a big issue, as there are normally 2 or more circuits running in parallel to provide redundance. However, this wasn't the case. The circuit number 1 from Wimbledon to New Cross was undergoing maintenance. This is a standard procedure as the electrical demand is lower in the summer months, so it's the best time to do any routine maintenance. With one circuit down and the other tripped, a huge section of London lost power. The next question is, how did London Underground respond and how robust were the systems and procedures they put in place? To help with this question, we should consult the investigation report issued by London Underground shortly after the event. As we know, the power went out at 6:20 during the evening rush hour. London Underground power control staff received over 1,000 alarms at once. They were able to establish that the issue was the loss of a bulk supply point, which was confirmed when they contacted the power provider EDF, but they couldn't get a time frame for restoring electricity. The two bosses had 2 choices: fire up the SEP supply at Greenwich, which will secure the emergency lighting supply and all other critical services before the Alby supply runs out, or reroute the power from the other functioning bulk supply points and restore the train service. Given that the time to reroute the supplies was about the same time to fire up Greenwich, it was ordered that the service be restored via the other bulk supply points. This took about 20 minutes to achieve, but this didn't mean that the trains just started moving again. Once the power was restored to London Underground, network assets were energized in a prescribed manner. The first, which came on as soon as the power was restored, was the station lighting and power, as well as the tunnel lighting. This was followed up by signalling systems, and then the air compressors, which operated the rail points, which allow the trains to switch tracks. Finally, it's the traction power's turn. However, it is the responsibility of the line controllers to say when the tracks can be electrified again, and they have to confirm that there aren't any staff or passengers walking through the tunnels. Unfortunately, everything didn't go as planned, and there was confusion and delay, as London Underground report states. At 1820, therefore, lines were quickly paralysed. Stations were evacuated as planned, and control staff sought to establish what was affected, when power would be restored, and train locations. All lines successfully contacted the Network Control Centre in the early stages, but most found contact increasingly difficult to maintain as telephones were rapidly congested. Some circumvented this channel by speaking directly with the power control room staff. Information did emerge about the contingency switching operations and likely effects on power availability. However, this was not a uniformed or rehearsed process. As a result, some lines used this knowledge to plan their approach and evacuation and restoration. Others knew less about when and how the power was to be restored and its effects. This caused uncertainty and meant train evacuations and service restorations were not planned with any precision, but improvised as circumstances dictated. Thus, 5 evacuations via the track were coordinated by controllers or managers, but 3 were initiated by local staff following procedures. End quote. This meant that the first traction power was restored on the Central Line at 1849, and the last, being the District Line, at 1940. Just after midnight, all the trains were running to schedule. So what were the criticisms on London Underground? The first one you may have picked up on is that this blackout occurred less than a year after Lots Road was closed. It was argued that had it not been closed, the network would not have been affected. Although this is true, it still may have caused local disruption at stations that rely on D&O supplies for vital communications equipment and other services. And in its later years, it's not as though Lots Road was performing without fault. For example, in November 20th, 1996, there was a generating supply failure. Therefore, it could be argued that by closing Lots Road in its current form, the risk of power supply failure was reduced overall. Another area of improvement was the way information was disseminated and the familiarity of procedures in the case of widespread power outages. This led to detrainments and a delay to the resumption of service. The investigation report makes a number of recommendations and improvements to mitigate the risk of this in the future. But there was plenty that was done right. As the report states, our response in evacuating the areas affected by the power failure was successful in that no one was hurt and no one was left in darkness. No one left the system in an uncontrolled way, and there were no self-detrainments. End quote. The Olby system did what it was required to do. Allow people to safely evacuate, and everyone got home, safe, eventually. In the last video, I'll discuss some of the innovations on the Underground as London strives to be carbon neutral by 2050.